This is the Landlording for Life podcast, where landlords explore their success and stories of failure while building a foundation to improve upon. Here is your host, Sean Morrissey.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Landlording for Life with Sean Morrissey. Now today we have on the line from Hawaii, of all places, Mr. Ted Fish. And now Ted's a mortgage banker with Federal Savings Bank here in the western suburbs of the Chicagoland area. However, Ted is also a landlord and property manager where he owns and manages his own property in Colorado and then manages properties in the Bloomington, Illinois area, which is about 2 hours away from his home location. So the reason this episode is going to be so valuable to you landlords is to get some of the pros and cons of, either using a property manager if you're managing from a distance or deciding to tackle the property management landlording aspect yourself. So, Ted, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being on.
Hey, Sean. Thank you. Happy
yeah, man.
to do
Thanks
this
so
for
much.
you.
Thanks so much. So, Ted, tell us a little bit about your background. How'd you end up as a landlord?
Yeah, well, it actually dates all the way back to about 17 years ago. I was a long-term student living in Colorado, and I figured that I didn't want to live in a little tiny room anymore and work hard to pay the rent. So I started looking at real estate to purchase, and I figured if I buy a big enough house, I can let my friends live there with me and use their rent to pay the mortgage. Because that is exactly what I did. I ended up finding a nice 2-unit home in Fort Collins, and my friends loved the house. Everyone moved in, and that was the beginning of me being a landlord. I basically lived there while I was going to school, and everyone lived with me. I finished up. I graduated from Colorado State and continued to live in the house, and then I got a job, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. So about a year and a half after graduating from CSU, I found myself in the trades, and I was a sprinkler fitter, a fire sprinkler fitter. And although I had tons of respect and I learned tons about the trades, carpentry, plumbing, electrical, you name it, because we were retrofitting buildings. We were starting from ground up. So I got to see quite a bit, and I really did learn a lot about, construction, which really helped me in the future with, just looking at properties, seeing what's wrong with them. I could change out my own water heater, things like that. So that always helped me. And that's really how I got that background.
That's awesome.
But in the end, I found that I started to feel underpaid. I was literally running some of my own jobs, making $8.50, and I was like, I'm going to get pigeonholed in this industry if I don't do something. So I actually decided to move back to Chicago to try to, pursue a career.
Okay, fantastic.
And and that's what I did. So I moved back 2003 in the summer. And the funny thing is I got back into the trades.
Back here in the Chicagoland area.
It was really hard to find work at that time. It was 2003, and just going to interviews. They're playing Metallica, and everyone just sits in, and and it's another one of those interviews where I'm interviewing for like a sales job selling life insurance. And I'm like, that's just not, I don't want to have to bother my family and friends like for the next decade trying to sell them something that they don't want.
Makes good sense. So how did you end up as a mortgage banker?
Well, after I did construction for that summer, well, during my interviews, I did interview with a mortgage banker who my aunt was a real estate agent, and she said, well, this guy, he he does great and he loves numbers and you own a house and maybe this is something that you would like. And I told her that, well, when I bought my house, I really enjoyed working with the mortgage banker that helped me buy it. So I sat down with this guy and interviewed with him. But he told me that, you probably won't get your first check for about 6 months, Ted. You really need to work the realtors and you got to build up on this. And I told him that unfortunately is not going to work for me. I need
cash now.
Eat.
Yeah.
I need money now. Yeah. So, and I continued interviewing until I got back into construction, and I actually was making the best money I ever made because I was union. And so I was able to save up quite a bit of money. But then late October rolled around, and I was laid off.
Okay,
of
yeah,
course.
due to the seasons.
Winter came in Chicago,
Yep.
right? And but the beauty is I got a government check. I got the unemployment check, so I was like, wow, this is great. I never had unemployment, and this is how it goes for the construction guys. But I'm thinking is, hey, I got a bunch of money, so I ended up buying another house in St. Charles pretty much right before I got laid off, actually. So I found myself in a real situation. I was like, oh, man. So I did get friends to live with me. So, again, I did the thing where I had friends help me pay the mortgage by living with me. But now I have unemployment check coming in. So what I did is I went back to that mortgage banker that I interviewed with in the summer, and I said, teach me everything. Let me know how you do this, because I have 6 months now. I have a check coming in. And he really, put his hand out and let me, showed me the way.
Sweet.
He taught me to pound the pavement, carry my rate sheets, go in and out of real estate offices all day long. And it was grueling. And I did that every day. I had a routine every week where I'd go in and out of the same offices, trying to visit the same realtors, telling them the latest and the greatest programs and where the rates were, and just trying to make a relationship with everyone that I met. And eventually it paid off. Out of all those people I saw, it really boiled down to one realtor that gave me a chance, and I did his loan. Then he referred me to a friend who was an investor who ended up, doing, I probably did 10 of his loans, and then just things just started to blossom. And that was how, my path to becoming getting into mortgages. So I was a broker.
And not to interrupt here, but during that time frame, then you ended up owning 2 multiple unit properties, right? One in St. Charles, Illinois, and the other one in Fort Collins.
Well, the one in Fort Collins, 2 unit, it's a ranch, but the basement is completely finished with its kitchen, living area. So that's the 2 unit. And then the house in St. Charles is on a nice big raised ranch. So that's not a 2 unit in St. Charles.
Got it. But while you're getting started in mortgage banking, you acquired your first 2 properties. Now, how did the Bloomington properties come into play? The Bloomington, Illinois properties come into play, because those are about 2 hours away from, let's say, the St. Charles area.
So my father had remarried, and his wife, Mrs. Fish, became the swim coach at Wesleyan, Illinois. So they moved down to Bloomington, Normal, where Wesleyan is, and that's where they live today. And, my father retired, but he decided that he wanted to get into real estate, and he started buying up rental properties all around Wesleyan, Illinois. And so he would always tell me, it's like, Ted, this is so lucrative here. I get so much for rent. And it's true. I mean, he would buy the houses for less than $100,000, like a 3-4 bedroom house, and he's renting these rooms out for $300.
And was this student housing for the most part? Okay.
Yes,
So
definitely,
that's an
absolutely.
interesting caveat too. I mean,
Residents-
student housing, you don't see many folks do, but you just described it. The cash flow there is incredible, right?
It's incredible, but the houses the wear is really rough because you have kids living in a house for the first time, and they're partying like crazy. So you gotta really screen them. You gotta see what kind of person's moving in this house, how are they going to treat it, and usually it turns out okay, but every now and then you get a bad seed.
You got to filter them out.
And I don't want to call a kid a bad seed, but they just, not respect.
Yeah,
no respect for the
yeah,
place
they might not
living.
be living like an adult yet, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. So to go back to your question, my father always told me that I need to buy property down there. He's like, sell the Fort Collins place. Thank God I didn't, because the real estate value in Fort Collins was nuts. But I did listen to him, and I ended up buying a 2-unit down there, and then my father wanted me to start managing his places as well. So not only do I manage my place, but I manage several of his places down
perfect.
there.
So you manage properties for him, which is roughly a 2-hour drive from the western suburbs of the Chicagoland area, and then you've got. Is it 2 buildings out in Fort Collins? 1 building in Fort Collins. Okay.
2 units.
So, being that you landlord from out of state, have you ever experimented with the idea of using a property manager in the past, based on maybe some hiccups you've had over the time frame in which you've managed thus far, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I did use a property manager at one point of time. So when I left Colorado, I had my house, and I didn't know what to do. So I found a property manager, Bernice, as Phil Lover. We're still in contact. So this was 2000, like I said, summer of 2003, and she, her property management company was PPR, Prime Properties, Real Estate, I think it was. But so she owned a small company, and she was a property manager. And so I used her for about maybe 4 to 5 years. I used a property manager out there. So, and she was great because she was a small company. I only dealt with her, and her husband was the handyman. So it made things really easy. If there was a problem, he would come in and fix it, and she was on call. And
that's an excellent point, because this day and age, you either have these national property management companies, which might be cheaper in the long run because of the volume they run, or you have the local property manager like you had there, and you're dealing with somebody directly, who's going over there. So there's pros and cons to each, but it's interesting to get your perspective as to why they were intriguing to you, because you weren't being pawned off from one person to another through a large company, and you knew who was going over there. So that's good stuff.
Yeah, they had a really good system. And, honestly, I was looking at the prices too, and she had a flat fee. I think it was like $150. I know most of the places wanted to take 10% of my rent. And so, I was looking at the price, and in the end, she got out of the business. She said it was just too much. She was dealing with too much stuff. And she's like, I was one of her last properties, but she slowly got out of the business. And so that's when I had to start doing it on my own. Well, actually, I had a friend property managed for me, one of my old roommates and friends. And then he property managed it for me, but I used Bernice is all her forms.
Perfect.
So that kind of gave me an insight to, what I need to know. I mean, they have some interesting laws in college towns. And Fort Collins has this law called, I don't think it's called 2&U, but that's what us landlords call it. You're only allowed to rent to 3 people that are non-related.
Yep. I've heard similar types of laws.
Yeah. and so I kind of had issues with that because, I have this big property that I can rent 6 bedrooms to, but I can technically only put 3 people on a lease.
Oh, and I mean, that's another fantastic point. We're kind of getting on this student housing thing too, and kind of the pros and cons there. But ultimately, you want to check your local laws, right? If you've got a limit on the number of non-related people that can live in a house, stay away. I mean, it's going to affect your cash flow in those types of communities. So good stuff there.
Yeah, and so she had, she informed me of, what I need to do and how to do it. I had the forums. She had the pre-rental apps to screen them. She kind of really showed me the ropes. And then I taught my buddy when she left, my friend Bob, who was going to property manage my house, what to do. And I basically told, I basically had all the knowledge at that point, but I wasn't ready to take it on myself. And so my friend Bob watched my property for, I think he did it for maybe 1 year, maybe 2. I can't recall. But, he was starting out with his family. I think he was on his second kid, and he just didn't have the time to go show the property and manage calls and whatnot. And I understand. And that's the point where I really decided, well, you know what, I'm going to take this full on. I'm going to do it myself. And that was right about the time where I was getting into the properties in Bloomington, Illinois. Okay. I got married and I moved out of my house in St. Charles, and I kept that as a rental too.
Great.
So I added that to my portfolio. And, and then I talked to my accountant, and, he says, you really need to do an LLC to put all these properties in. And so I formed a LLC called Big Fish Property Management, and they're all underneath that to protect myself for, any lawsuit, if something, horrific happened at a property, you have to protect
absolutely.
yourself,
And just to touch on something else you mentioned, it sounds like all these properties that at least you went into with owner-occupied financing, live there, in essence, mortgage-free, and with the other roommates and whatnot, and then eventually converted them into rental property. So, I mean, that's, just based on my experience over time, that's the way to do it, because you're less out of pocket with the down payment, and then you're able to transition out of them as life changes. That's awesome.
Absolutely, you get the great mortgage rate, but see that works when you're young and single. So not all of them were that, because my property in Bloomington I had to buy as an investment, so that was 20% down. Given that I'm a mortgage banker, I obviously was able to get myself a nice rate, but. Good point, Sean,
that's the way to do it. If you're 20 something and single, is buy them owner occupied and then transition as your life changes. So that's fantastic. Now, how do you go about handling evictions and, let's say, repair calls for properties that are out of the area? Do you have like a network of vendors on the repair side and maybe an attorney like in Colorado you like to use, or how do you structure that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and that's probably one of the hardest parts of property managing from a distance. Colorado, over time, I had used various handymen and whatnot, and I found a guy that I trusted, and he was reliable. So I have a handyman that I call on, and then I also have a guy that I had do a lot of work for me as far as the bathrooms and plumbing. But the one thing that I wanted to do in Colorado was keep fixing that house up nicer and nicer to a point where, when a renter walks in, they're going to see, wow, this place looks really nice. And it's going to attract people that like nice things.
And it'll take good care of them. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And so some of my vendors that I had redid my bathrooms, I can call on him for plumbing, or, I have a tile guy, and then I have a general handyman. So I've kept these guys' numbers over the years. And so those are the guys that I call on. Now, if there's a problem with the furnace, I'm just going to go to Yellow Pages, and we're just going to call, the local heating guy, and of course that's if my handyman can't handle it. Now, Bloomington, my father already had a local handyman that he trusted, and he turned him over to me. And his name's Mr. Fix-It, Jeff. Nice. Mr. Fix-It. And he is amazing. And he, all I could do is text him what's wrong in the address, and he is over there. So finding a local handyman that you trust is very important. And that's how I can do those things. Now, as far as releasing, I don't know if this is the best method, but it's the only method I have. I try to get a relationship with the current tenants that I have in the house. And when I'm getting ready to, they let me know that they're moving out, I advertise the house usually on Craigslist, or I can do hot pads. But, Craigslist has always been really successful for me. I let my current tenant know that I'm going to be renting it, and I ask them in advance, would you be, willing to help me show the property? And usually I give them an incentive. If the property rents to somebody that you showed it to, then I'll give you like $100 referral
Okay, that's
fee.
clever.
And they're happy with that. Yeah, and they're happy with that, and usually, because I get a good rapport with at least one of the tenants. You usually find that one of the tenants is, the guy that likes to talk to the landlord, and so that typically is the person
Your
that
go-to guy.
Will end up helping me out.
Yeah.
Now, so that's the way I've done in Colorado. In Bloomington, I do that for some of my properties, but my properties aren't as up to date. They're not as clean and put together as my house in Colorado. So I think some of my tenants in Bloomington, they're more, I don't know. I think they're just living there
it's
to
a
live
different,
there.
It's a different class of housing, I suppose. It's student housing.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily know what you're going to get. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Even though I still rent to students in Fort Collins, like I said, I brought my house to a certain level where I believe that people want to live there and they're going to respect it. Whereas, the houses in Bloomington are still a little rough around the corners, and I get the kids living in there, and I had them showing it, and I'm just not getting anyone to call me back, after they show the property, and I'm like, what does the property look like? So the good thing is I do have family in Bloomington, so I send my sister over there now, and then I can take a trip. So that's the good thing, is I can take a trip down to Bloomington, whereas Colorado, I only do one trip a year to go and investigate it. So I go to Colorado once a year, right around the time the kids are moved, like at turnover. So that's when
right before the lease is up.
The one tenant. Yeah, the lease is up. The new lease is coming. So I go out there once a year, kind of make it a little vacation, working vacation, to check the property out, see what else I want to do to it, make sure it's in order. Whereas the blooming properties, I can drive down or whatever. But I found that method of it just depends on the tenants, but some tenants I don't trust to show the property when I know that they're already living kind of in filth.
Got it.
So, and it doesn't work. And man, I've seen everything.
Well, and let me ask you this: so what would you
tenant
consider, based on your years of doing this now, and it's been a while? What do you think are some of the pros and cons of self-management versus using a professional property manager?
Well, good question. I think a professional, a larger company, I should say, it's going to be more streamlined in some of these things, like trusting your tenants to show the property. I don't necessarily know if that's a great way to go about it, but when you have a relationship with someone,
and you got an incentive program built in, so that's a nice idea. I mean, you're making it work.
Yeah.
So that's promising.
So I'm making it work. You're never going to see that out of a big company. So, a big company, you're going to be more secure. They're going to have their systems in place. If rent payments are late, if you need to do evictions, they're going to be on the spot. No, I've had to do that myself. I've had everything from domestic violence in my house with a large family with 6 kids tearing up the house to I once rented to a fraternity that played lacrosse. Lacrosse fraternity, that was not a good idea because when they turned the house back over, I think I had about 80 holes in my walls and doors. And then, so I slowly learned to, figure out to screen my tenants a little bit better. But I did have a squatter once in one of my houses in Bloomington. And man, was that hell. I think if I had a professional company, they probably would have screened them better than I did. And that may not have happened. I basically lost a year's rent because of that. And then you got to think of the legal fees and the eviction.
Getting the house ready again.
I mean, this kid waited. He never moved out all the way up to when I came to the door with the sheriffs. The cops are like, oh, they're always gone by this point. Well, they knocked on the door, and he's walking out ready to go to work. I mean,
nothing's wrong. Nothing's going to change.
I'll move my stuff. I'll move my stuff when I get back from work. And they're like, no, you won't. I literally had to go in there and throw all his crap in garbage bags and throw it on the front of the yard. And it was just
we're going to have you back on a Halloween show or something to talk about the horror stories you've had over time. But that
is, yeah. I mean, I can get into it because that kid was a disaster.
I hear you, man. And with that in mind, with landlords starting out, right? Because that's really part of our target audience here. What words of advice would you give them after years of being a landlord at this point?
So I'm sorry. Can you kind of rephrase that for me?
So for landlords starting out, somebody that's just thinking about getting into landlording, or maybe they own 1 or 2 properties, like what words of advice would you give them to kind of take them to the next level? Yeah, just based on your experience.
Well, my experience is I rented to friends. Now, I don't necessarily know if that is a good idea because you don't want to turn a friendship into something bad.
Yeah, business relationship and friendships get tricky.
Yeah, and I had that with many of my friends, but I never made it bad. So don't take things personally. So if you do rent to family or friends, keep it business, but you got to keep it separate from your friendship. And in the end, it all works out. My friends I had a friend that owed me rent for more than a year. We just kind of backlogged it. I knew he was going through a hard time, but eventually he paid me back, and interest. And, we maintained our friendship all along. Now, if you're starting out and you don't want to, rent to family and friends, that could be a good idea. Renting to family and friends is easy. So I think my suggestion would be that lay the rules down right in the beginning with your friend. Hey, we're good friends. We're going to stay friends through all of this, but I do want you to know that this is my business, and I have to treat it professionally.
Perfect. Yeah,
so,
and you know what? One thing we keep falling back on, and I think it's been the majority of episodes so far, is managing expectations between tenant and landlord. So prior to that tenant moving in, set the expectations as to what you expect out of them and what they can expect out of you. But be it whether they're a friend or just somebody off the street that you screen properly. Because if you do that, it's going to make your landlording experience much smoother, without a doubt.
Yeah, that's it right there. You hit the nail on the head, Sean. It's you set expectations, and then you don't feel weird when you have to call someone and ask them for rent. You don't you have a procedure, and they know what to expect as well, and no one's put on the spot, and it just makes things more fluid. And if there is a problem, you say, I just want to, I need you to be honest. Tell me what's going on. And usually people come forth and you find a solution.
No, I totally agree. And it's just keeping that open line of communication. So, all right, Ted, awesome, man. Well, that's going to be our time limit for this episode, but you gave folks lots of good info, and we kind of covered all sorts of things from student housing to managing out of state to your profession. I mean, being a mortgage banker. Now, Ted, if folks want to contact you and maybe learn more about the products that you have in-house for mortgages, what's the best way they can get in contact with you?
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Sean. Well, email is always great. It's T-Fish, so T-F-I-S-H at thefederalsavingsbank.com. My phone number is 847-754-5603. Be happy to talk to anyone. I do specialize in investment properties. There's all kinds of programs out there to utilize to get you in your first property to buying a 4-unit. You can buy it owner occupied but still rent out 3 of the units. There's programs out there where you can buy a property that's in distress, borrow the money to fix it up, and then rent it out, and man, you can make a lot of sweat equity in those properties. So I'd love to talk to anybody about those. There's a couple programs out there. The FHA 203K would be one. I'm sure you heard that one. And then Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have their own as well. So yeah, give a call. I'd love to chat with you. Sean, I appreciate the time and having me on the show.
Oh, you bet, man. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you coming on as well. And, and just to your point there, at the end of the day, like, you can go to a lot of places this day and age to get a mortgage, but to actually work with somebody that's doing landlording, that's actually managing properties, I mean, stuff like that is super valuable. So, certainly give Ted a call. Anyways, that's going to wrap up this week's show. And next week, we will release our next episode. In the meantime, thanks again for everybody for tuning in. Hope you found tons of value in this one, and we'll see you next week. Have a great day. Thanks, Ted.
Thanks for listening to another episode. If you like what you heard, leave us a 5-star review and join our Facebook group to share your deals and ideas by searching at Landlording for Life. See you next time.